So Annie is a AVP of Global Innovation and Marketing at L'Oreal, where she develops professional and consumer skincare products for 40 plus countries around the world. She began her career in the beauty and personal care CPG industry over 10 years ago at an early stage beauty startup, where she discovered a love for the business of beauty that led to her current role at the world's largest manufacturer of cosmetic skincare and hair care in the world. Today, she drives new product innovation for SkinCeuticals, the #1 medical aesthetic skincare brand worldwide, and now a new brand. She is passionate about skin science, honest storytelling, and mentorship. Well, Annie, welcome to Niche Insights. I'm thrilled to have you on our program today. I personally feel our lives and decisions are dreams that are largely driven by our past and the environment that we grew up in. So I'd like to start off the interview learning about where you grew up in your family life. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. I was born in a little town outside of Nashville called Hendersonville, Tennessee, and it's really known for some of the old country music stars like Johnny Cash lived there, Reba McEntire, so it was a really kind of a cool place um, with some interesting links to country music. And yeah, it was just a very suburban kind of upbringing, middle class, but really nice.
That's really cool. Well, it's crazy coming from Nashville to New York City. I'm sure that was kind of a big transition.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, I've moved a lot. I've really had quite the circle around the country that, inadvertently led to New York as my last stop. But, I've loved every place that I've lived and they've all been so different. But New York is definitely a great place to be right now.
Awesome. Well, good. If it's not too personal, can you share your family ethos? So for example, what were your beliefs and expectations, and how did you personally feel about your parents' like societal expectations to you?
Yeah, sure. Neither of my parents went to college. And so, my mother was a homemaker. She was really, that mom that was cooking 3 meals a day and doing the laundry and, very different from how I've sort of ended up. But, it was a really nice way to grow up. And my dad worked for a factory. He was essentially a factory worker. I think of that sort of that last, generation of when Americans could get a great job with no college degree and just, work in a trade and have a pension and give their family a nice life. It was kind of, I think that's sort of going away in a lot of ways now. But they were just, it was a very loving, happy childhood, very, I had everything I ever needed and lots of love from them, very good memories. So yeah, that's kind of my background.
Good. Well, that's so nice. You definitely ventured off kind of on a different path. And I think that's really interesting. Like, were you interested in beauty, fashion, and luxury as a child? Is this where you ended up, like, is this where you knew you wanted to eventually end up? Or did you have different hopes for your future at a young age?
I had no idea. I wasn't interested in beauty at all. I was such a tomboy. Growing up, I just cared about sports. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't care about girly clothes for the most part. I didn't really even have a boyfriend until I was like 18 or 19. I just wanted to hang out with my friends and go fishing and play sports. I ran track and cross country all through high school and I did lacrosse a little bit. So that I just was not a girly girl. I didn't care about makeup. And, that was like a bit before the advent of social media and
Right.
Instagram and this obsession with sort of, beauty tutorials and how to do your makeup. And, it just wasn't really a love of mine at all. So
Yeah.
I had no idea that this would be my path.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how different experiences can lead you down different paths. And also, like, especially with the rise of social media, um, more people are aware of kind of this phenomena of looking good and, makeup. And so I think that's really cool. Um, so thank you for sharing that with us. Can we fast forward to entering adulthood? You did go to college, right? Can you tell us about your major and your thoughts at the time about your career? Were you still kind of a tomboy? Were you still not really into beauty and fashion? Like, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it still wasn't for the most part. I thought I was going to be a professional artist. So I loved drawing and painting, sculpture. Like I just loved creating. And so I went to James Madison University in Virginia because they had a very good art program. And they were also in the mountains. It was very beautiful. And I love outdoor recreation. And so, I went there to get my Bachelor of Fine Arts. And my parents, linking back to sort of like their ethos, they, I think they very much hoped for and expected me to go to college and gave me lots of support to do well in school growing up. But they were really kind of just a follow your heart, honey, kind of, whatever you want to do. There wasn't a lot of pressure to do something that was more commercially viable. In some ways, I wish they almost had put some pressure on that way. I think I don't regret anything about my path, but you know, I think getting an art degree when you want to be an artist or an art professional, isn't necessary, right? So I think it's a good path for some, but it's almost like, if you are a creator, do you really need the 4-year degree? And so for me, I think it was just a path of discovery that one, I didn't necessarily I think have the original voice that it took to really be an artist.
Yeah.
And it took a while of like really just, understanding that about myself and giving up on that dream and being okay with that. And I think that gave me the freedom to explore other things that sort of led me here. But it was an incredible experience. And when I went to school, I ended up getting really involved in whitewater rafting in West Virginia, which is just a couple hours away. So I was just obsessed with whitewater kayaking, rafting, and that kind of consumed me for several years during college and then after. And so that's how I ended up, in Jackson Hole after college because I came out to guide on the Snake River there. And, that is kind of what set me off on this maybe more random path than some people have after college, where they know, maybe they don't know exactly what they want to do, but they go into, an internship or a job and an entry level job, and they begin right away. I had a bit of a delay to my career, which we can talk about.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that because there is something to be said about the privilege that some kids have, younger kids going into college and kind of having the awareness around kind of what you were talking about with art degree and knowing that in some ways, if you want to become an artist, other degrees can be applicable. And so I'm really curious about that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, I don't regret the art major because, one, I think it just gave me a freedom to be creative and think a little differently. And, going through an organized critique in art school, you make something and the whole class sits around and they just shred it, right? They think
yeah.
everything is wrong with it, right? And I think that prepares you very well to, just take feedback and criticism. And it's not so different from presenting an idea in marketing. Like you're definitely going to have to hear hard things. And so I think it taught me that, feedback is a gift. And it taught me a lot about, I think a broader foundation of, design and aesthetic and things that help me today, even in, I'm a very sort of visual builder. Like if I have an idea, kind of have to lay it out and see it. I'm more of a tactile person when it comes to, how I sort of do the job of marketing. And I think that comes from an art degree. So I think even all these years later, it was definitely an excellent experience. It's paid off in other ways. It just wasn't what I had ever, thought about or envisioned.
Right. That's really cool. It's almost like your random path actually helped you a lot, in some ways, and you're benefiting from it now.
Totally. And, I think of like this example of Steve Jobs. There's this like famous story about him when he was younger and he sat in on a typography class. He was auditing classes that he was interested in that had nothing to do with, anything other than he just wanted to learn these, disparate sort of skills. And so that typography class was what sort of sparked in him this design aesthetic that's associated with Apple and what made them so different. So it's just these little these experiences that may not seem directly related to what you want to accomplish, but they still, I think, build who you are and the skill set that you have and the way that you think. So I definitely encourage people to, experiment, take risks, explore, do something that has nothing to do with anything. You're never going to regret those experiences.
That's really cool, Annie. I really like that. So then How do you think that applies to your journey in Jackson Hole and whitewater rafting, if you're comfortable with that, telling a story?
Yeah. So, after college, I think there's not a lot of pressure on an art major to get a job right away anyway, right? Unless you have
Yeah.
like a very certain, idea in mind. But I just was, I didn't have a lot of strategic planning or forward thinking. When it came to my career, it was really about enjoying my 20s, enjoyment, pursuing the things that I loved. And, the thing that about Jackson Hole is once you stay for a summer, if you stay for a winter, you're hooked. So,
Yeah.
my friends were like, hey, why don't you just like get some skis and just stay, a little bit longer and do ski season, right? And I did that, and I was just like, oh my God, and then fast forward 6 years later, and I'm like, it sucks you in because it's such a beautiful place to live. And, outdoor recreation was something that really just drove me and sparked me. And that's what I was passionate about. And I don't regret that at all. It did, I think, in some ways, of course, like, you know, uh, set me back compared to people who immediately pursued their careers aggressively. I mean, I didn't have a career, right? I was just kind of having fun. But it also allowed me to travel a lot, that seasonal lifestyle where, you're skiing in the winter and you're rafting in the summer. And then in the spring and fall, town closes, everybody leaves. And I was, traveling in Central and South America. I was, learning I got my PADI certification and learned how to dive. I think I, again, sort of developed an entirely other set of skills that was also very useful about just sort of capability and independence and risk taking and putting yourself outside of your comfort zone and being in unusual environments. Like it's definitely lots of people will talk about how great it is to travel and what that does for you, but it's really true, especially in your 20s when you have the energy and the freedom. And I highly recommend gap years and experiences like that.
Yeah, I think it's a really unique set of experiences that are actually pretty character building and, you know, form who you are going to end up to be. And I think that's really special. So then what made you decide to leave simple mountain town and pursue kind of a sort of really competitive and fast track life?
Yeah, well, I remember, I was, I think, around 26, and I'd been in Jackson, since college, and there was just this bluebird powder day. It was like snowed 11 inches overnight, and I'm on the mountain, and there's, this beautiful inversion fog over the valley, and it's just this, I mean, you know it well, right? But it was just
Yeah.
this perfect day, and I remember being so unhappy and thinking like, why is this not enough? But, at that point, I just got to a point where my body was really strong and my brain was dying. I think I was so hungry to do something that was mentally stimulating, and that was the right time. And after that, I was really searching for what was that next step. I knew I just kind of needed to grow up and get a job a little bit, right? And didn't, and you see people with massive ski injuries in Jackson and they blow their knee out and then, that's all over anyway. So you can't really build a
Right.
life around that. Um, and I was never going to be a professional skier. I grew up in Tennessee. Like there's no, there's no way I was going to get to that level. I just really enjoyed it. So from that moment of like realizing there's no reason for me to be unhappy in this moment, but understanding like something has changed and I'm changing and like Jackson's not going to do it for me anymore. I started looking at business school and kind of other avenues. And that's when I met your mother, Maya, who is the founder of Circel Skincare. And she was just starting that up and they had one product they were selling online. And, I got to know obviously your family on a personal level and started getting interested in what she was doing. And that relationship with her and that initial interest in, the process of watching her build that startup was really what set me off on this in this career. So, I really have your mother to thank for the path that I've had and even just stumbling upon it because like I said, I was not into beauty or skincare. I would never have picked that as an interest. But so when as I became involved with her company and started really loving this process of building a skincare company from the ground up, right? This idea of like we've got to raise money, like how are we going to afford our next batch? Where are we going to manufacture things? Where are we going to distribute? So from there, I became her first employee, and I moved to Dallas to help grow the business because you have lots of things that you need to run a skincare company in Texas. You don't necessarily have those things in Jackson Hole, right? You
Right.
need chemists, you need facilities, you need things. So That was just kind of how I really accidentally stumbled into it and realized that I loved it so much. Not just necessarily the business of beauty, but just business. But beauty obviously is very fun. It makes people happy. It's very, it's a nice industry to be a part of.
Yeah, that's really special. I can understand what you mean when you're kind of living in a mountain town, and although you love going out in nature and doing all of these fun things, like at some point you kind of feel like you need something to change, and like you said, exercise your brain. I
Yep.
think I understand that, and that's one of the reasons I eventually left the mountain town and came to New York too. So
Yep.
so then you ended up leaving Circel with my mom and working for L'Oreal. Do you think you just realized you wanted to do something with a bigger corporation, or did you want to leave Dallas? What kind of led to that?
Yeah, again, it was just sort of an evolution. I mean, I loved living in Texas. I never expected to, coming from Wyoming and then into Dallas, which was a very different environment. I really loved it. I made great friends there. It's a wonderful place to live. And I loved working with your mom and Circel. But I think it just, with any startup, it's like, it goes through phases in its life. And I think it just got to a point where mutually, I didn't have many people in the company because we were small to learn from directly. And your mom was, running things from Jackson. And also, I think because I wasn't able to learn from others, I wasn't able to continue to give the right skill set to the company too. Because if I'm not growing, then I'm not giving more to a small company. When I think when you're a young company, you really need, you need to be
Right.
given continuous knowledge and growth and new skill sets. And so, I think it's mutually, it was just, it was time to move on. And
Yeah.
so um, from there, I actually took a job at a mid-sized company called Natera International, and they have one side of their company manufactures skincare, and the other side has several sort of like mass skincare, personal care brands. And I was managing a baby care line called Baby Magic, which is like this legacy iconic baby care
That's
brand,
so
pink bottle, and
fun.
like people's like grandmothers remember this brand, right? And so that was a really interesting like quick foray into the mass market, big box retailers, Walmart. But I only did that for about 4 or 5 months. And I had sent my resume to an HR contact at L'Oreal, not even necessarily applying for a job, not expecting anything. And then one day out of the blue, I got a call from um, a recruiter for L'Oreal, and she wanted to talk to me about a position at SkinCeuticals on the US marketing team. And at first I was like, do you have the right person? Like, are you sure? Like, it was just like, wow, but they really liked the idea that I had come from a startup and I had sort of like a 360 view of the business. And that was very appealing to them because, I think not so many people have that profile coming into L'Oreal. So it was an advantage for me to have that sort of non-traditional path. And yeah, that was the rest is history. In 2016, I moved to New York to work for SkinCeuticals on the US side. And then I did that for about 4 years. And after 4 years of that, I moved on to the global product development team where I'm actually developing new launches and formulas for launch across all of our countries.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, wow, that's really impressive, Annie. And I do think working with a startup requires a unique skill set, a unique set of skill sets, just because, it definitely being an entrepreneur takes staying up late at night and a lot of grit, and sometimes recognizing that some things aren't going to work and some things will work. So I think that's really cool that you were able to apply that to your job with L'Oreal. So in the beauty business, you're under the umbrella of uber competitive CPG businesses, right?
Yeah.
So you essentially have to have the best marketers, customer service in the world to like maintain a share of that. I think SkinCeuticals has a very specific business model. So how did SkinCeuticals get its start, and how did the business model evolve? Can you share some of
Yeah, so I mean, SkinCeuticals has a great brand story. So, the founding scientist of SkinCeuticals was a skin cancer researcher named Dr. Sheldon Pennell, and he was doing essentially skin cancer research out of the dermatology department at Duke University. And in his research, he started to realize that vitamin C could have potential for wound healing and anti-aging benefits in the skin eventually. And so he published sort of very, groundbreaking research on stabilizing vitamin C for penetration into the skin. And before, this just wasn't, it wasn't thought that you could do it because vitamin C is a very unstable molecule. So through very extensive and methodical testing, he figured out that there are certain formulation parameters under which you have to formulate vitamin C in order to have it penetrate the skin and have an in-skin benefit. So his research really kind of created the vitamin C industry and that space, and now everybody has a vitamin C product, and it's just grown so much. But when SkinCeuticals was founded in the early 2000s, there weren't really medical cosmetic skincare brands. There was a little bit, like Obagi was there with, hydroquinone, but the idea that a dermatologist would dispense cosmetic skincare, it just was a very nascent idea and industry. And so the medical spas, which we're very familiar with today, this was kind of a new thing, right? In like the mid to late 90s and the early 2000s. And so the brand kind of came up in that that rise of the aesthetic dermatologist and medical spas, and just this, now what is commonplace for people to seek out, more advanced skincare solutions and aesthetic practices with medical professionals and have more elevated skincare. And so, they founded that brand, and I think just maybe 5 or 6 years later, in 2005, L'Oreal acquired the brand, and so that's how it got into, came from Dallas to New York into the L'Oreal portfolio, and the rest is history.
Well, that's really interesting. Oh, sorry, God.
Yeah, no, it's extremely interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
not every brand has a founding story like that, and that science is something that has kept me so involved in the brand all these years, because we do incredible research, exploratory skin research that is very thrilling to be a part of.
Yeah, it's really cool because oftentimes when I think of skincare, I think of sort of this, luxurious, like spa sort of image. But when you think about actually having a science behind skincare, it makes it even more fun and interesting because it kind of develops this level of effectiveness.
Mhm.
So I think it's really cool that you got to work for a company that really broke into that sort of market of skincare. Um,
Absolutely. It's such a love brand, and it's such a, it's once you dig into that level of science and you get the money to do that level of research, it's so much fun. And, every skincare product involves science in some way, even if it's just a basic moisturizing benefit. But, we have such talented cosmetic chemists and scientists here at L'Oreal, and I have access to all of that in our R&I division, and that has been such a rewarding experience. But I just love the science of skin, and that I think is what keeps me so engaged in the industry more than anything else.
that's really special. So then, since you guys are more about the science of skin, would you say that your primary customer is the derm sort of doctor versus the consumer? Or what is your relationship with your consumer, and how do you talk to them? Do you feel that you are having to utilize a direct to consumer strategy versus doctor driven strategy? How have you seen the business shift since you began as a result of the rise of social media and COVID, et cetera? I know that's kind of a packed question, but
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, SkinCeuticals really has two customers that we serve, right? One is our medical professionals, our dermatologists and plastic surgeons, estheticians, and the other is the end consumer who, may be a dermatology patient. They may be going into an office to experience our brand, or they may not. They may be experiencing us online or through other channels. And so we really have to think about both, and we have to talk to both. But I think the one thing that has been really interesting to watch as SkinCeuticals positioned the way that we are is that I think generally the skincare consumer everywhere is looking for medical valorization of their products, their ingredients. I mean, now we have a rise of skinfluencers on social media platforms, and it used to be just someone who was maybe like a lifestyle brand, and you really loved their skin, and you watch them promote products. But now it's a whole new level. It's cosmetic chemists are talking about ingredients in a very scientific way about why are parabens actually not that bad, and what, let's dig back into the paper that gave them a bad rap, and these incredibly interesting and detailed ways of learning about skin. you have dermatologists who have huge social media following or peer influencers. So not only are they influencing their, just regular consumers online, but they're also influencing their own dermatology peers. And so, you have, I think, an elevated type of influencer that's giving out quality information that consumers can trust. And I think people in general are educating themselves more in individual ingredients. They care more about the science. They want to know not just what their dermatologist recommends, but what is their dermatologist actually using, right? Like they want to know if I open your cabinet at home, what's in it. And
Right.
I just think it's such an exciting age of really digging into beauty. And I think doing a lot of myth busting, like companies aren't getting away with these sort of fluffy claims anymore. People are really getting educated about what good skin science and good skincare looks like. And that's happening globally, not just in the US.
Right, right. I do know that you guys have been working with China a little bit and also selling with, I know Amazon has been a huge player in the beauty industry over the past 5 years. Can you speak about this? And does SkinCeuticals have an Amazon strategy?
We don't. So this is actually, I'm glad you brought this up because I've just realized recently, since I moved off the US team, I wasn't monitoring Amazon closely, but SkinCeuticals only works with authorized retailers. And so they're very select. So we're very, we're medically dispensed. So we work with, authorized medical accounts, but we also have a few e-commerce sites. We have our own brand site. Not too much retail, just a little bit, but we're really largely a medically dispensed brand, and that's the majority of our business. But there was an Amazon account called SkinCeuticals for years. It was selling our product, fake product, and everyone thought that was us. And we do a lot of messaging as a brand to educate our customers on, who's an authorized retailer, where should you be getting authentic product, because there are lots of places in the world that are great at knocking off skincare that's doing well. And you could give me two bottles, a fake bottle of our CE Ferulic, our most famous product, and one of our bottles, and it's really difficult sometimes to even tell the difference. And so
Right.
where that point of sale of where you're purchasing your product is so important. And for us, you know, um, back to Amazon, they finally, that account was shut down, and I wasn't involved in any of that, but I'm just so grateful that it was, because that was such a confusing thing for people to think SkinCeuticals was on Amazon. And the worry for us as a brand is that they're getting product that isn't effective, isn't proven, isn't safe, isn't going to work. We really put a lot of money into clinical proof that our products do what we say they're going to do. And so it just always broke my heart that someone could be getting a fake bottle of CE Ferulic and they wouldn't be seeing the benefits that we promise. And then they would, feel badly about the brand, or it would hurt trust in the brand. And so, diversion and those types of accounts are a huge problem, just not even just from a revenue standpoint, but from a brand trust and brand love perspective. It's really important to us that people get good, authentic, quality products.
Right, right. I know that my mom has even had issues with that. People, taking her green clay cleanser formula and pretending that it's her. And I agree with you. I think it's sad that some people, first of all, they're not buying from the people who have, created this project and put a lot of research into this project, but also they're not getting the real deal. So they're not really experiencing the true effects.
Mm-hmm.
Which can lead to a lot of misunderstandings.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then I kind of think this is a good segue into talking about China. I know there are billions of hungry consumers entering a middle class that only emerged in like about the last decade. Um, what are your thoughts on entering the market, successes, pitfalls, lessons learned? What about any geopolitical issues relating to working with the Chinese? And if this is too controversial, you do not have to answer. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I love working with China. China is a great market for us, and it's grown a lot in recent years. The Chinese consumer really appreciates and looks for U.S. made skincare brands, which I think is so interesting because I feel like the rest of the world is obsessed with like Korean skincare, or was for, first it was like French skincare, and then it was Korea, and like, but they really appreciate U.S. made products and innovation. They love luxury. It's such a fun market because they're just really into luxury brands. And like you had said earlier, just like texture and the experience of skincare, packaging. They're a very educated consumer. They look very closely at ingredients. They scrutinize products. They have lots of options there, and everyone, I think the whole world is like fighting for, that consumer right now. And so it's a really interesting place to do business. And it's a very important market for us.
That's really interesting. And I guess as the global world kind of gets closer together, you're going to want to start working with them even more closely. And I'm sure that's evolved more in like the past, I don't know, 5, 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. It has. It's changed. I mean, China over the past couple of years has implemented a new set of regulations that very closely monitors what is imported, how it's registered, how the claims are, communicated on pack and to the Chinese consumer. And so it's almost like if the FDA here in the US just had this massive overhaul of rules around how cosmetic ingredients can be marketed and sold. That's what's been happening in China. And so it's been, I think a big challenge to stay abreast of that and understand, as we're changing the ways that we do business to be compliant with these new regulations, to make sure that we're, dotting all of the I's and crossing all of the T's, and that we're playing by all of the new rules, and sometimes even just interpreting those rules is a question mark. And so it's been a huge exercise, I know, for our brand, for sure, on how do we stay compliant and continue to offer high quality products that are robust in claims and testing and science to the Chinese consumer. And so it's been tough, but it's I think we're kind of over that curve, and we're doing really well, and we're working really nicely with our partners in China.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like navigating a completely different world and learning how to integrate their policies as best as possible. So then, given how difficult it can be, have you found that there are any cross-border direct-to-consumer opportunities? And for our listeners who might not understand, cross-border means that the order is not being fulfilled in country. So the order can be placed on a direct-to-consumer website, but the fulfillment takes place offshore from a country nearby. Would this type of setup make more sense given the in-country issues in China? I know we kind of touched on this, but I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah, it can. I think it's definitely, I think it's one way to sort of, get to market more quickly, but it's very case dependent. There's a lot of nuance. So I think it would depend on your strategy. But yes, I mean, there are opportunities to sort of think they have, I wouldn't call it a loophole, but there are ways to sort of speed along some of the regulations and registration process if you were selling somewhere else and you import from a country nearby. There it's such a complex world that I don't even know if it would be interesting to get into it, but it's definitely one way that you can sort of get your product into China a little more quickly. But it's not just a blanket solution for everything, because like as with anything, there's a lot of nuance into when that would make sense or how you might actually go about doing that.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So then you kind of talked about how you deal with counterfeits, or not how you deal with them, but some examples of it. Is this kind of still a big issue for SkinCeuticals, maybe in areas that aren't in the US, or does it kind of vary by country? And do you find yourself having to battle these issues a lot, or do you just kind of let them settle themselves?
Yeah, no, I mean, L'Oreal in general puts a lot of resources into identifying and tracking diversion. And so, diversion it can also mean taking legitimate product and pushing it through an unauthorized sales channel. And so, we're always, going to be on the lookout for that. But it can also mean, fake counterfeit product that's being passed off as authentic. And this is always going to be a challenge. I mean, anytime you have a product or a brand that is gaining recognition, that does well, that sells, you're going to have people knocking it off because, that's just a easy way to make money, right? And so there are lots of different ways that we're trying to combat that through sort of, unique identifiers on our packaging, ways of tracing, a product sort of journey from, our manufacturing facility to a retailer. There's lots of different ways that companies are combating this, and not just L'Oreal, everyone, right? I mean, I think this is across the board and not even in just the beauty industry. But it's really, I think that's sort of an interesting battle of technology, right? Because the better the technology gets, the more efficient this process can be, and the more you can crack down on that counterfeit and diversion process. So it's very, sorry,
No, you're fine.
let me get a water.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, so I think this is like something where I think about this advent of AI that we're in, where it's like,
Yeah.
I think that that's an area where AI is probably going to become extremely useful and make huge strides for companies on, how to track and prevent diversion.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like with the rise of this global world and this global industry, and with the rise of AI, we'll see more innovation with kind of cracking down on that sort of stuff. Um,
Absolutely. And it's not just the brand that cares, as a consumer, you want to know that the brand is doing something to keep you safe and making sure your purchases are guaranteed and that you're not getting, unsafe or ineffective product.
Totally, I agree with you. So we know a lot about you and we know a lot about your work with SkinCeuticals in the beauty segment. I'd like to switch gears and glean some insights from you and what you've learned about what it takes to be successful in the beauty business. So the majority of our listeners are people like me, young, just starting out, or still in school, or beginning to think about our careers and how to formulate strategy. I have several questions that I think will help us all. One of my first ones is, what are the two most important lessons learned about the beauty business or luxury segment that you can share with some of our listeners?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I think not just in the beauty industry, but in life, um, networking is everything. I almost every good turn in my career or thing that has happened to me is not because I was super talented or smart. I mean, those things will always help, right? Hard work, all these things that you always hear, but it's who you know. And networking, I think there's sort of, I think young people sometimes can think that networking is just, a reach out or staying in touch. But, really networking is, I think, the development of relationships over time where you add value to them and you don't ask for anything. So that one day when you do have an ask, you get that help. And generally, people want to help each other, right? I mean, I found that like people just want to help. And I think it's really all, I think, who you know, um, and putting yourself forward and making those connections and relationships, even if it seems disparate, and also being a connector, right? Helping others. If you feel like, hey, I've got this opportunity over there, I was at a weekend wedding in Miami, and I met a woman who was working in global health, and I'm connecting her this week to another woman who does similar work in Brooklyn, because I just think that they should meet and have a network of, like they do similar work. And there's no reason for me to do that. I'm busy, it's not easy to stop and make sure you're coordinating, but just always thinking like that, like, how am I adding value to other people? How am I connecting? How am I nurturing my relationships? This is everything. Like, this is like the number one thing I can tell people is be available to people, bring high value relationship to others. And then when you need something, you're going to get it, and you're going to get
Right.
it in spades.
It's sort of a mutually beneficial relationship where you guys both put in equal effort, and I think that that can turn out to, in the long run, benefit the most and for both parties. um
Absolutely. And I think, I think when you're young and you're starting out, you may wonder, like, well, what value can I add? Right. And like, you get all these LinkedIn messages. Like, I don't even check my LinkedIn messages. And I think a lot of people think that like LinkedIn messages are somehow a way to network. That's not networking, right? And networking would be, look on Crunchbase for startups who just raised a lot of money and contact them and say, I love your company and what you're doing. Like, I have um, you know, I'd love to come learn about your company, and, just, I don't know, find an angle, find a way to make yourself present and add value, rather than just the standard way of thinking about networking would be my advice.
right, and that kind of speaks to how important experience is, and getting another learning experience under your belt rather than just kind of standing by and sort of trying to introduce yourself to different people. um
Yeah, I mean, find a way to showcase like something that you show that you've learned about that person, that company, and that you're interested in something specific, and that you can, that you have passion and drive, and that you want to add value in that area or that space, so that they'll remember you, so that you can be different, and so that you're not just saying, hey, I'm here, I'm great, help me.
Right, right. So then, Can you talk about the role of failure on your road to success? What is the value of failure and how should we feel about it, especially as young people?
Well, I think failure is inevitable unless you are just, some sort of, anomaly.
Yeah.
I think failure is great. I mean, lots of people much smarter than me have said fail often and fail early, right? And fail up. And so, I think it's just, I think, I've talked about this with colleagues a lot too, even as women, sometimes I think we get into sort of negative self-talk or imposter syndrome, right? Where,
Yeah.
um, you don't realize the things that are good in the failures you have, the accomplishments. I mean, I think it's nothing is black and white. And when you fail, you will learn something from that and you will definitely think back on that later and say, okay, well, I learned this. I mean, I can think of, an easy example for me is devices, right? So I've launched several devices in my career and I've learned certain things about devices. I feel, most of them were failures and I know why they were failures. And so, when people want to talk about, launching devices or getting into the device industry, I have like a very clear set of lessons to impart to them and know what I would and wouldn't do from a business perspective too. So, it could be anything, but feel free to fail. I mean, I certainly failed. Um, yeah, I think, through most of my 20s, a lot of people, even in my family, could look at me and say, you're failing, right? At this like idea of like what you're supposed to be doing in life. They're like, why are you over there skiing? You're not making any money. Like, what is your problem? And so, that failure though ended up making me somewhat fearless and not too concerned about my career path I didn't overly put pressure on myself. And I was able to just sort of be happy and learn and grow in ways that I wouldn't have in a big corporation.
Right. I think um learning how to do things right, especially in a business setting, or maybe I shouldn't say right, but learning how to take on a certain set of issues takes failure and figuring out what works best with different types of situations. And that doesn't just come with like, you know, figuring out that it's worked amazing in the past. I think it also comes with figuring out that, oh, that really did not work for me, you know? Um,
Absolutely. And being vulnerable about it. I mean, the one thing, I think one thing we talk about a lot here at L'Oreal is like what makes a really strong leader, right? And the one thing that sticks with me is vulnerability. And I talk all the time about my weaknesses, my knowledge gaps, my failures. Like I am very open with my team and others about that because I think everyone can relate to that. And I think no
yeah.
one wants to work with a perfect person. So,
No.
I think I almost like wear my failures on my sleeve. What skills I don't have, what I need from my team, what other people who are, smarter in those areas can add. And I think it's just an easier approach, right? Who wants to put pressure on themselves to know everything and be everything you can't?
Right. I think especially with connecting with people and creating connections and networking, like one thing that I found after moving to New York, and of course I'm not at a high level of this, but even when it comes to, bonding with classmates, I think vulnerability can be very helpful. There's nothing attractive about, appearing as like a perfect person who has their life together. So I agree with you. I think that applies to almost every area in your life.
Absolutely.
So then, I have just a few more questions. Can you offer advice on how to break into this business? Is there a specific way you feel like someone's resume should look, or any skills that you feel are required?
Yeah, I mean, so the resume debate, I feel like is one that's going to happen like every year until humans don't exist anymore, right? Like, what's the perfect? Should you do a cover letter? Or should you not? Like, what's you need? Are photos okay? Or are they not? Like, I mean, I think in general, just simple format, one page if you can. You want to think about when you're building a resume, put on the hat of like, okay, I'm someone who's reading a lot of these, and I don't care. You've got to make it interesting and simple and clear. I don't,
Right.
I'm not going to care about all of every little thing. It's like, I just want to be able to scan this and essentially feel like, yes, you're a strong candidate for this position. And there might be something interesting about you. And
Right.
so whatever that looks like. So I'm a fan of like very simple formatting. I think, photos on resumes is a bit of a no-no lately. I'm no expert. I'm not an HR, but I feel like there's like a bit of a discrimination thing there. So it's just, I
Yeah.
would look up best practices online. Everybody's going to have a different, opinion, but With that, I think it's just really represent yourself as clearly, as interestingly, and as distinctly as possible.
Got it.
Um, and cater it to, the position you're applying for.
So then,
And
go ahead.
oh, go ahead. Mhm.
No, 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 go ahead.
So I just think, as far as how to break in, I mean, there's no right answer, right? Like I said, like you could look at like if you don't want to do a big corporation, look at who just raised money because when people raise money, they typically spend it on headcount and they've got to get rid of it, right? Because their investors want to see how they're spending it. So that's like one that I always tell people, like, hey, if look at like I mentioned Crunchbase, it's just something I follow because I'm interested in sort of like the startup, like who's raising and all of this, which is something that, sparked from my days working with your mom. And going through that process. But if there's a company you like or an industry you like, find a way to meet someone in that company that's not a LinkedIn reach out, right? Like
Yeah.
just find an angle and start meeting people. And you might get someone who is entry level or at the front desk, but they're willing to, give you a name or schedule something for you or put you in somewhere. Like it's just it could be anyone. It could be the person in the elevator next to you who works for Deloitte and is, impressed that you were able to ask them about their handbag. It could be, I think it's like always be networking. It comes back again to networking. But then also obviously there's job portals where you can just apply. And if your resume is strong, obviously you may get a call back, you may not, but find someone else in the company and reach out to them and say, hey, I just submitted my resume and I love your career path. You have a few minutes to talk. um, I don't know. I just think it's about creativity and not giving up and just seeing what sticks.
Interesting. Okay. So then my next question was about advice on approaching L'Oreal in pursuit of employment.
Mhm.
So, would you say that, and if I'm overstepping, you don't have to answer this. Would
No.
you say a lot of L'Oreal employees kind of end up just um, stepping upon that position or sorry, stumbling upon that position in some of the examples that you just gave, or is a lot of it connections, or is a lot of it just sending your resume in?
I think it can be all of those. I think sending a resume and L'Oreal is it's a different example because it's so big, right? I mean, we have so many, I think we have almost 40 brands. And so, you could have a 30-year career here and never do the same thing every 3 years. Like
Right.
it's just so massive. And so L'Oreal is very good at looking at and wanting to nurture young talent. I mean, for them, they really want to bring in graduates that are interested in the beauty industry and are showing a passion for that space because that is our, we're beauty. We're across, hair and fragrance and makeup and skincare and all these things, but we're very specialized in beauty. So if you can demonstrate that that's your passion and have a good resume, I think you've got a really good shot at just, at having conversations through the portal. And I would say once you submit that, then also start a few reach outs and see who you know. Has anyone ever worked for L'Oreal before that can introduce you to someone? Is anyone's mom an alumni of L'Oreal? Just try work it from all angles. It will never hurt. But I would say even just just a straightforward application process at L'Oreal, you can get very far because they want to bring in top talent. They want to nurture young folks and they call them L'Oreal babies here, people who come in right after college and they stay, they never leave because it's such an incredible environment, especially for women and young women.
Right. Well, that's really special. Just like you said, especially for young women. And I like the nurturing environment. You kind of feel safe in that sort of environment.
Absolutely.
So then, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners or share to help our listeners? Most of us are watching with like stars in our eyes, wondering how we can be you someday.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it sounds like a trope, but it's find what's interesting to you, or even if it's not something that's super interesting to you, find something that you want to learn and put yourself out there. So if it's an internship or if it's a, an early management position, and maybe it's not, if you don't get a call back from LVMH or from, Colgate or from J&J or these big companies you might be going after, find a smaller mid-sized company, do that for a couple of years, find an easier in where you can find people, develop relationships with them, right? I mean, in a big company, it's hard to know where to start, but in these smaller companies, if I had someone who came to me from a small growing brand or a retailer or an adjacent, even like, if you interned at CVS, right? Or like something like this, like that's adjacent to the beauty industry, that makes you very interesting. And if you have a little bit of experience, if you can't get in right after college, that doesn't work out for you, come in as an assistant manager a couple of years later, and you're going to have a wonderful career and a great path, and you're going to be stronger for it.
Awesome. Well, that's really comforting and that's great advice. Thank you so much. You have been so generous with your time and what you shared is so invaluable. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much again.
You're welcome. Thanks, Sydney.
Yeah, of course. I'll see you later. Okay, bye.